starts now.
There are probably as many causes and issues out there as there are words in the standard dictionary. Too many to count, and more importantly, too many for anyone to take notice. So how do you raise the volume, get attention, recruit people to your point of view, and maintain the momentum? This is the topic of this episode of the BBB podcast. First of all, there is no single cookie-cutter approach. Second, just because what you did worked well before doesn't mean it will again. The other important piece we're going to discuss in this episode is social media tools and advocacy apps, and whether or not these things offer any real value to your work. A person who lights himself on fire in the middle of a downtown street will generate attention. But how do you maintain that attention and translate the awareness into action? Not as easy as it seems. I was recently approached by a fellow who wanted to raise awareness of a disease he has lived with all his life, and one that would sadly shave a few years from his expected lifespan. Advances in medical treatments were happening in different parts of the world and showing some signs of success. Not surprisingly, he wanted access to that treatment, and he wanted everyone who lived with the disease to benefit as well. He was passionate, committed to making sure as many people as possible learned about the disease and the positive changes the treatment could make. Yet he was a little unclear about why he wanted to do that. While he explained that treatments existed in other countries and should be brought to his, he wasn't altogether clear about what his goal was. And this is completely normal. Most people don't. Did he want the public to support the need for medical treatment? The problem was, the public probably didn't know much about the disease. Hence the need for some education. But why bring the public into the equation? I asked, what if they say, gee, that disease is absolutely horrible, but there are so many other things that need funding. End of story. And what if money had nothing to do with the outcome? Would the public then sympathize? Let's say they did. So what? How does that translate into the government updating certain regulations so that this treatment could be imported into the country? Should the messaging be targeted to the elected officials, who presumably could influence the process, or the government bureaucrats, who run the process? Of course, access doesn't necessarily mean affordability, so a level of subsidy would be needed to accompany the approval of the treatments. And there's a whole other campaign. Through that brief conversation, we identified several goals: public support, political support, policy change, access to the medical treatment, and improved lives. At least 5 goals, with many more objectives, and each of those goals entailing multiple steps. And he was hoping that a single solution existed. Again, his approach in thinking is completely normal. Most people will say something like, well, I want to get as many Facebook likes for my petition. They'll explain their thinking, but few will acknowledge the need for these efforts to translate into action, and a clearly defined action at that. Someone, somewhere, employed the petition as a form of advocating their cause. That doesn't mean that the petition is useful in and of itself. Back to the need to recognize that there isn't a single solution. And just because it worked before shouldn't lead one to believe that it will necessarily work again. What's notable in this context is, as quickly as something can go viral through a social media platform or series of networks, the demographics of those platforms can also change with amazing velocity. They should not be considered unchanging and secure. The primary user demographics for Facebook in its few years were drastically different than those last year. And those differences are even more augmented as a result of new and different groups of users being drawn to the platform as a result of some social or economic change, a pandemic that keeps many people home, for example. What worked last year on a platform that proved effective at that time won't necessarily deliver the success you hope for when executed this year. The shifts of users and how those users interact has been fascinating to watch over the past 8 to 10 months. So last year's campaign may need a different outreach and organization tool. The point here is to know the platform or the app. Look closely at the user demographics within the geography you want to mobilize. Which leads us to another important point. How is it that anyone assumes you can mobilize even one person through a social media platform? Here's where we get into some relatively new tools and apps. Now, this podcast does not endorse one app over another. Also, you'll want to pay close attention to anti-spam laws and privacy rules in your area that you're targeting. Some apps that have shown effectiveness extend from the old-fashioned word-of-mouth form of promotion. Tell a friend, tell a family member. It's a personal, respected, and trustworthy endorsement of the product, the service, the message, or the cause. Team and Outvote are two recruiting and organizing apps that have shown levels of success in the United States. UCanvas, Organizer, Field Edge. Each has its comparative advantages. Reach is another that has some excellent features, and there are many more. Most charge a monthly fee, which can be quite affordable depending on what you need. Again, it matters who you want to reach, and why that target group can help cause the change you hope to see. As a closing thought in this episode, I'm reminded of a lecture I gave to a university class in advocacy. I cautioned these young women and men to not rely exclusively on digital media simply because it's fast and new. Anyone can sign his or her name to an electronic petition as easily as pressing a button. Really not much engagement or thought happening. And the problem increasingly is that legislators know that. Your congressman or your member of parliament knows that your electronic petition with however many digital signatures has limited authority. In contrast, 2 mail bags filled with letters or postcards, each handwritten and signed, represent a hell of a lot more effort, thought, and ultimately authority. Just like the court scene in A Miracle on 34th Street, the bags and bags of letters are presented to the judge. Carefully choose the most suitable medium to parlay your message. Do it right, you'll make a lasting impact. Visit stephenchristiansen.ca for more episodes. This podcast is available on all streaming platforms, including Anchor, Google, Breaker, TuneIn, and Spotify. I'm Stephen Christiansen. Thanks for listening.
Production of Stephen Christensen. Podcast complete.